This podcast discusses child sexual abuse and the impacts of harm on children and families. While we won't include graphic detail, some listeners may find this content distressing. Please take care while listening and consider pausing or seeking support if you need to. There's many and varied support services available, including Lifeline on 13 11 14, Kids Helpline for 5 to 25-year-olds on 1800 55 1800, and the Sexual Assault Helpline on 1800 010 120. If you're outside of Australia, we encourage you to seek a local support service. Welcome to this episode, Divna. I'm so pleased to have you here. You have extensive experience in child safeguarding and parenting, especially working with children in clinical settings. Your insights in this regard are so valued, and I really appreciate your time with me today.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start off looking at government responses. So you were an expert advisor and participated on the panel for the review. Tell us what effective government responses to child sexual abuse prevention looks like, and what risks do you see when systems focus too heavily on that crisis response end rather than sustained preventative support for families? It's a big question, I know.
Yes, it's a two-parter. So let me answer the first part. Really what we need in effective government responses is a sustained investment in the prevention, response and detection of child sexual abuse. And really what that's looking like is embedding child protection and sexual abuse prevention across multiple systems. So it's not just an early childhood educating setting, it's across health settings, it's across school setting, it's across early intervention and parenting support. What we really need to ensure is that every parent, every contact point that a parent has and everyone that's in contact with children gets a similar message. So all across the multiple systems, they're aware of that this is an issue, that there are protective strategies that can be implemented. They're different from parents to health settings and schools and daycares, but that there are actions that individuals can take. And most importantly, not that crisis response like you talked about. So we really want to see this as a thoughtful kind of planned investment so that this is long-term, it's sustainable and it's ongoing rather than just, oh my gosh, something's happened, how do we respond? And the challenge, I suppose, with the crisis response, and it's great that when something happens, governments want to do something, that's fantastic, but it can be really short-sighted because they feel the need to do something immediately. And we see positive steps that are taken sometimes, but they miss the other nuance and the other things that are needed. So, for instance, the cameras in daycares was an initial response for many governments when these kind of things happen. And they do have a part to play, but they're not a single solution. Mm-hmm. And so we need to make sure that we're not just responding to a crisis, but we're thinking planfully and thoughtfully about what we're doing.
From your perspective, why do you think we often do fall into a crisis response as opposed to investing time, as you were saying, to, I guess, maybe plan it out a little better?
Honestly, I think it's partly to reassure the public and it's partly a political issue. Is they want to say to parents, your children are safe, this is what we're doing. And what I really like about the fact that within Plain Sight we had kind of 10 months to investigate this and to really plan that is it gave us the chance to respond in a considered way. It gave us the chance to look through what are the experts saying, what are the people on the ground saying, what are parents saying, and to develop a set of recommendations that is not just a knee-jerk reaction, but is really planned and thoughtful and informed by the evidence. And when we can do that, we can actually enhance the chances that it's actually going to work and that we're going to see fewer children exposed to risk and we're going to see fewer children harmed. And that's the goal, really.
Absolutely. You can really see in the recommendations that it provides a clear roadmap for reform. So I can absolutely understand what you're saying. You've done lots of work, and particularly lately speaking with media about in response to some of the critical incidents that we have seen happen. In terms of your work, working with children, what are some of the risks of children seeing some of these messages, and what would your message be to those children if they do inadvertently come across the information, and also your message to parents to support children who may be exposed to some of these news stories?
Yeah, and in fact, that happened just this week. Someone said to me, "Oh, my daughter saw you on the news." And I was like, "Oh, what did you say?" And so really the message for children is that you have the right to be safe in every context. If something has happened to you, it is not your fault. They're the kind of two primary messages for children. And then I would say talk to your parents, talk to the people in your world that you trust and about what you're feeling, what your reaction to that is. Because these things can be a bit scary to hear for children. But then again, children sometimes kind of brush off and they're just like, what's happening here? And for parents, I would say talk to children in a level that they are able to understand. So it's kind of a developmentally appropriate level. So for very young children, it might be sometimes people act in ways that aren't safe for children or that are not the right way. For a little bit, children that are a little bit older, it might be things like some people might touch you in areas that they shouldn't touch you or treat you in ways that you shouldn't be treated. It's important for you to always tell me about that, or it's okay for you to tell an adult about that and who else they could talk to. For even older children, you might say, this is what we call sexual abuse. It's something that shouldn't happen but does happen to some children. This is why I'm taking the steps and protective measures I'm taking. So this is why we don't let you, for instance, go and stay with someone that we barely know. And for parents, the message is really that this needs to be conversations that are not happening just because the kid might be exposed to something in the media. It's conversations that parents should be having regularly with children because that actually plays a protective role. So we want parents to be alerting children to the fact that not everyone is going to treat them right the same way, but to do so in a way that isn't traumatizing or scary. So it might be things like most people in our world will be safe and will treat you well, but sometimes people forget to do the right thing or treat you in a way that's not okay or touch you in a place that they shouldn't touch you. If that happens, it's never your fault and I want you to talk to me about it. And then have those kind of conversations more regularly. So it might be, we have a rule, for instance, in our family where nobody gets to see or touch your private parts. And so when they go to a play date to someone else's house, I ask them, how was the day? What did you do? What was fun? Did anyone kind of act in a way that made you feel uncomfortable? Did anyone break our rules about how they're touching you or what they're looking at? And that kind of just normalizes the conversations. What we want to avoid is, here's a single conversation about child sexual abuse prevention. Now I've done it, I don't need to do it till they're 14 again. It's kind of like road safety. We want to make sure that it's something we're doing regularly and that's normalised. So it's not a scary thing for kids to talk about or to hear about, but it's something that they feel comfortable and safe to talk about. So that if something does happen, they're going to go to you and they're going to tell you and you're going to be able to react.
One of the things I've been speaking to other guests about is this idea of having avoiding these conversations because they're uncomfortable, which is really a social issue. What I'm hearing there is this is a way that we can start to change that and start to introduce this as part of our normal conversations with children and with each other to support a culture of normalizing prevention.
Exactly. Yep. And I mean, it's really hard for parents because parents would rather stick their head in the sand and think that it's never going to happen to them. And I understand that because it's confronting. But we can empower parents to have the ability to do as best as they can to kind of protect their children. So normalizing these conversations, having these conversations is actually going to have a really protective role for children. So the more we can encourage parents to be aware that child sexual abuse is a risk for their child, and B, reassure them that there are practical things they can do to make a difference, the better.
Before we move on to speaking more about the system, my final question along that theme is about your message to parents. So many parents have children in institutional settings, in care. They may be concerned about what they're seeing right now. What's your message to them?
It's a really tough one, and I've seen in mums groups and things like that, parents are terrified. Do I need to pull my child out of daycare? What does that mean for work and things like that? My message to parents is really that this is a risk. It's not a particularly high risk in that it's not that every child that goes to daycare is going to be abused. So what parents need to do is take the actions that they can take to make sure that they feel as safe as possible for children. So that will be things like investigating the centre, looking at are there clean lines of sight, making sure that they're aware of what are the breaches in a daycare centre or an early education centre, and that they are doing some of those things that we're talking about, like teaching children about what they can and should be happening to their bodies and what's not happening. And then kind of just keeping a watchful eye. So it's being alert but not alarmed, and talking to other parents, talking to the centre will go a long way towards reassuring them, particularly if governments are looking at broader systems change. So it's be alert but not alarmed, and act on your instincts. If you are really worried about something, if something's happened that's concerned you and the centre has brushed it off, then actually continue and take action.
It's a really powerful message, and it really flows in nicely to my next question, which is, from your perspective as a clinical psychologist specialising in parenting, which is what you have just been speaking about now, what role do parents and caregivers play in preventing child sexual abuse beyond speaking with children? And how can the systems, importantly, better support them to fulfil that role? So you've spoken a little bit about the conversations that parents can have, but really what role can systems play there?
So parents can play a really huge role. I guess one thing to highlight is that they are not solely responsible. I would not want parents to think if they do everything right, that will absolutely guarantee children are safe. We need to kind of layer levels of protection. That's where that kind of system response is so important. What I would really like to see is that systems support parents to have the knowledge and the power to actually implement the change that they need in families. So things like talking to children, things like being aware of what situational changes can occur in education settings so they can pick settings appropriately, and really just having the messages about prevention embedded across everywhere they go. So when they're going to the doctor for their GP checkup or their 4-year-old vaccinations, handing a tip sheet to be like, this is something that's happening, having universal kind of messages to parents that they have a role to play, and normalising that this is something that they need to take responsibility for and to act on is really going to be powerful.
That's a really interesting point that I hadn't necessarily thought about in terms of health being a touch point to this information. Do you think we are making the most of that opportunity? No? Where are the opportunities there?
So I think really what we have is we have a system or a set of systems where parents respond and are worried when something happens, but the rest of the time it's never acknowledged. So in no kind of daycare checks do they talk about that. They may say we've got child protection. Health, they don't really do anything about it. But these are all of the places where parents will listen to professionals, and we have an opportunity to reinforce a prevention message. So we really need that kind of prevention embedded across all of the systems that families have contact with, so that they're getting consistent messages about their role and their power in terms of protecting their children. We know that that parents have a huge role to play, but not in isolation. There are parents, particularly that are family victims of these perpetrators, that did absolutely everything that they could. And a real message for those parents is that good on you for doing everything, and I'm sorry the systems failed you to the extent that they did. So I don't want to send, if you had done X, Y, Z, it would have prevented it. It's one part of a broader system of prevention that's needed.
Absolutely. The review shows that signs of harm and vulnerability are often present long before they're identified. That was a key theme throughout the entire review, and in fact the findings as well. What should systems be doing differently to help parents, carers, and professionals in the workforce recognise and respond to those early warning signs?
It's really tricky because many of those kind of behavioural or relational warning signs are also things that happen at different developmental stages and can be explained by other things. So from a systems perspective, what we really need to do is empower parents, educators and centre settings to recognise that these things might be signs of child sexual abuse or in fact other forms of trauma, and be confident and have a safe environment to respond to those. So rather than saying, oh, look, little Billy is suddenly acting up and he's having more tantrums than usual and isn't that frustrating, what can we do? Ask them, step back and say, what might be going on for Billy? Is there something going on at home? Have they moved house? Or is there something going on in the centre? Are they paying particular attention to avoiding one educator, for example, and looking at what might be happening and then being confident enough to respond to that. And centres need to have a safe enough environment that educators can raise those concerns internally and have systems of reporting in place to say, look, I'm really worried that something might have happened, and centres need to be willing to accept that that potentially might be a risk and look at what's going on and investigate and take action if needed.
If you were advising government on one priority to strengthen child safeguarding into the future, particularly from a parenting and public health perspective, what would it be and why? I know it's a big question.
First up, there is no single one thing. So I'm glad that you said from a parenting perspective. From a parenting perspective, what we desperately need is universal embedded parenting support at a multi-level. So families can get low-level support if needed, right through to more intensive support if they're a vulnerable family or the child's at risk or something has in fact already happened to them. By embedding parenting support at a universal level, we're doing a couple of things. One, we're sending the message that parents have a really important role to play in children's lives. B, we're changing parents' behaviour. We know that population-based parenting support reduces the risk of maltreatment. We know that it increases child-parent relationships and that is related to positive mental health and lower risk of other forms of adversity. So by embedding it, we can improve all of those things. But the second thing we do is we normalise parents' role as a protector. And parents don't want to face that this is happening. They're not going to go along necessarily to this is a sexual abuse prevention talk because they think it will never happen to their child. But if we can embed prevention of child sexual abuse and other forms of maltreatment in a broader universal public health campaign where parents can get targeted intervention support as needed or broad public health messaging, we'll actually normalise this as a topic that parents need to be aware of and upskill them at a population level so that they can have the power and the resources to act as protectors for their children. So population-based parenting support is the answer.
Brilliant. So in summary, what I've heard from you today is the message to parents is be aware, not alarmed.
Absolutely.
And arm themselves with information and have confidence to ask questions. Parents play a critical role in prevention and the solutions to what we're facing. And we really need to look at our connection points of providing information to parents to normalise conversations around child sexual abuse.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else that I've missed there?
No, that's a great summary. I think that just for parents, it's not a one and done conversation, and to take this moment and the fact that this is in the media and you're hearing these things as a sign that you need to change what we're doing or enhance what you're doing if you're already doing that to protect your children the best you can.
Thank you so much for spending time with me today and sharing your insights. Hugely valuable, and thank you for your work on the report In Plain Sight.
Thanks for having me, Kirstine.
In Plain Sight has never been about a single failure or a single system. It's about how easily children can be lost when responsibility is diluted and how powerfully they can be protected when responsibility is shared. Safeguarding the future means acting early, acting together, and acting with courage, even when it's uncomfortable. The recommendations in this report are not abstract. They are practical, achievable, and grounded in evidence. But their impact depends entirely on what happens next. This series ends here, but the work doesn't. Because children can't wait for systems to catch up, and safety should never depend on chance. Thank you for listening to In Plain Sight. It's been my immense privilege to bring it to you.